Good morning. Thanks for checking out this video. So this is just a recap of what we did for one of our Saturday sessions where we talked about hip flexor exercises, and these are just a few that you can do. These are actually some pretty common ones, so hopefully, we can kind of get to the nitty-gritty as far as, why we want these exercises done, and most importantly, how we want these exercises done, and how this is going to be relevant to you as a dancer. So we talked about before how sometimes if you're feeling tightness in your hips, it's not necessarily a stretching issue. Sometimes it's a strengthening issue, but of course, make sure that you're seeing somebody appropriate to help you differentiate what is needed specifically for you. So today we'll focus a little bit on the hip flexors. There's going to be multiple hip flexors that we talk about. Obviously, when we talk about hip flexors, we're talking about muscles that flex the hip, that bend the hip up this way. And that's not only just your iliopsoas that we talked about, but it's going to be one of your quads. It's going to be part of your sartorius that is also going to do that. So when we talk about hip flexors, we're not just talking about one or two muscles. We're talking about several different muscles that perform the same action. All right. Generally, I like to incorporate some kind of hip mobility warm-up. All right. So, and this would be after you've done some cardio, so jumping jacks or some kind of high knees or heel touches back this way, things like that. Usually I like to go for 3 or 4 minutes just to get my heart rate up and get my blood going. All right. So I'm just going to use the foam roller for support, but the idea is this. The idea is that when we do mobility warm-ups for your hips, right, I'm not just like swinging it around, but I'm trying to isolate where my hip is moving from, right? So instead of like all of this happening, which you can get to eventually, trying to think about just at the hip, right? So the way we're going to do this is you're going to think about lifting your leg straight up, so just at the hip. So you're not trying to hike up your hip here, compensating, or you're not trying to let your back arch forward, yes? So as I come up this way, I'm going to turn out a little bit. Now I'm going to try and almost turn out as much as I can out this way. And then as I bring my leg around, I'm going to think about like I'm bringing it over a fence, right? So through here, and then same thing, not trying to hike this way. You will lift your pelvis a little bit, but you're thinking about on your standing leg, keeping that level pelvis, right? And then you're going to bring it all the way back, good, without overarching through here, and you're going to bring it down. And then when you come back around, same thing, just isolate at the hip. You might not feel like you get very far back here, but that's because we generally don't have too much hip extension. Good, bring it back around, and forward to turnout position as much as you can, and down. So you can repeat this a couple of times, thinking about just isolating at the hip. All you're moving is what we would call your femur in your pelvis, right? So you're trying to keep your pelvis as stable as possible, just moving from the hip. And if you would like, you can have a little bit of support here as well. So what we're doing is you're kind of lubricating the joint, right? If I have my pelvis on top and my leg is in my joint, my femur is in my joint, I'm moving it this way, right? From here, staying strong on top of that standing leg, coming back around, able to maximize that range of motion, bring it in and down. Good. And then you would do that on the other side as well. For the session we did the other day, we went 5 times back and forth, 1, back and forth 2 on each side. Okay. Once again, really focusing on standing leg. I'll demonstrate the second one on this side. And earlier, or just now, we were talking about your femur moving in your pelvis, right? So this is my pelvis right here. This is my leg, my hip bone, boom, here. What I am going to do now is instead of thinking about my leg moving in my pelvis, I'm going to think about my pelvis moving on top of my leg, okay? And the way I like to do this one is thinking about, if this is my pelvis, I'm going to go back and down, up and over, forward and down. Okay, so back and down, you're going over you're going over something, but instead of just moving at your hip, you're thinking about moving now from your standing pelvis, thinking about up and over. Okay, we don't have to worry too much about the gesture leg on this one, but what I want you to think about is as I come down this way, and we're doing most things in parallel. As I come down here, you can see how my pelvis is hanging back. I have to think about my standing leg and pulling my pelvis up. So I'm not trying to pull from here on this side. I'm trying to really work my standing leg. And then I'm thinking about bringing up and over. Good. And then as I come down, so now you can see my pelvis is kind of boom, down this way. I'm going to bring it up and over and down. Good. So in this sense, what I'm doing now is I'm moving my pelvis on top of my standing leg, on top of my femur. And that way I can also get the joint warm this way, especially in what we would say a weight-bearing position, right? You warm up the joint in different ways. You can warm up the joint with just femur in pelvis or pelvis on top of femur. So this way. And then once again, I'm just demonstrating these, but for our session, we did these about 5 times as well. So this is a good way to kind of get started to think about control, getting started to think about what that standing leg feels like. And of course, if we want to make it more dance specific, you can always just think about coming across this way. And then as you bring this around, woohoo, here, there. So making sure that you're thinking about that pelvis once again from here, gliding on top of that femur as you come down here, and then same thing as you come back around, however you need to do it. That's why I was using this guy, right? So don't be worried about like I'm losing my balance or anything like that. Make sure that we can get a good consistent range of motion through that standing leg, up and around, and back, and up, and this way. Yeah, that way, same thing. We're at standing leg. You should feel some muscles working on the side. That's going to be most likely your glute med or your glute max, trying to keep that hip stable, not gripping through back. Good. So those were part of our warm-ups that I'd like to use, especially for hips. So with any exercise progression, I like to go from the ground up, just so we can be a little more conscious of how we're using our muscles and whatnot. So you've probably seen versions of this, and what we are going to do is, if you have a band or you can tie a TheraBand, you're going to place that around your feet this way, okay? What I'm going to have you do is really think about, if I'm on my back, how am I also using my breathing, right? So we need to think about that as well. The exercise itself is going to look like this. You're going to come up this way, and you can bring your hips in a little more if you'd like. Good morning. You want to make sure that in this position, you don't have that space underneath your low back. You want to make sure your back is against the floor, and we do that by controlling with our breathing, okay? So in this exercise, what we're going to do is I'm going to have you push out this way. And when you push, what's happening is you're having to use this leg to kind of keep it in. So you're using your hip flexors to maintain as you push that leg out. Most important thing, once again, is going to be the abdominals. Don't let it sink this way, right? So here and in. So you're going to go push out, hold this here. Good. And bring it back. And once again, as I said earlier, you want to make sure that when you push this out this way, your knee doesn't start to fall in. When your knee starts to fall in this way, we actually begin to recruit muscles like TFL and whatnot, and so it becomes a little less efficient in stabilizing, right? So you want to think about maintaining that neutral knee position. Good. And back in, and out, good, and in, and out. And depending on how comfortable you feel, make sure that if you go this far and you're already feeling the muscles working and you're feeling that back come off the floor, then you know that that's your limit. You want to make sure that we don't compensate through here. as you push, breathing out. Using that diaphragmatic breathing and transverse abdominis activation technique. Yes. From here and out. So whenever we do exercises, I know we're talking about the hip flexors, but we also want to include the glutes in this as well. We want to be able to use everything together in a global sense. So we are going to do a bridge exercise with marching and then with a band as well. Similar to the placement is similar to what we did with the hip extension exercises. So from here, what you're going to do is, if you're familiar with the bridge, then you know that all you're doing is pushing up this way. Same thing as the exercise before. You want to make sure that you are not arching through your back. That's something we see a lot. So if you're beginning to feel a little bit of low back discomfort, or even your hip flexors kind of gripping really tightly, it may be because you're letting your pelvis sink down this way. Okay, so you want to make sure that your pelvis is you're not trying to tuck underneath, but you're trying to keep it a nice neutral. Good. So from this position, what you're going to do is you're going to think about lifting up this way. Good. And down. What I really feel working is, besides me having to pull up with my hip flexor on this side, I'm feeling my glute working really hard to stabilize and my abdominals working to stabilize. In this way, what I'm doing is I'm basically, in a way training my muscles to say, all right, I need to stabilize through here and move through here, right? So once again, if I'm up in this position and I am doing this, I don't want my I don't want my pelvis to start falling. I don't want to grip in my low back. I don't want this low back arch. I want to be able to keep everything stable using my glute to hold me up and down. Good. So from here and going up and down. Good. And up this way. Think about really driving into the ground with that left leg here. Good. Then here, driving to the ground with that right leg, and then lifting up. Good. And down. The thing about the bridges is you want to make sure that when you lift the leg, you're not rocking side to side, that your hip bones are maintaining a neutral position. Cool. All right. So we've probably seen these ones before, where you place the band as such, and then the exercise itself is just marching up and down like this with resistance. This is great because obviously you're providing a little more resistance to the feet, therefore you have to use your hip flexors to pull everything up. However, one of the things we want to talk about here is going to be first leg placement and position. So if you're performing these exercises, and for the sake of just consistency here, let's have your arms out in a second. So if your arms are out in second and I'm pulling up this way in parallel, I want to make sure that my knee is still maintaining that neutral position, that I'm not tracking in, right? So I'm not pulling up this way, pulling into my center. And you may feel the difference if you were in a neutral position here versus if you start to bring your knee in. Sometimes you may feel that TFL start to really compensate, right? So we don't want to facilitate negative patterns. So here, if I am coming up this way, good. The other thing I'm going to want you to focus on too, once again, coming back to breathing. How are you controlling your abdominals and how are you maintaining stability through your abdominals, right? So if I were here, and the problem that we see with many dancers is that rib flare out, especially when performing stability exercises. So if I am doing this, I want to make sure I'm maintaining a nice neutral spine and I am maintaining my breathing and being able to close my ribs down. What happens is if I open my ribs up this way, I am now using my low back to try and hold myself up like that, right? And then as far as the psoas is concerned, if you refer back to our other post, you'll see that the psoas attaches to your low back. So what happens is if I'm unable to stabilize through here, what happens is my psoas is going to try and do that. So what happens then is now my psoas has to do two jobs. It has to stabilize my spine and it has to move the leg, right? So you're basically tiring it out really fast. So when we think about, it's a simple exercise, but being able to hold through your abdominals, stabilize through here, and then use your hip flexor for mobility, right? You can shift side to side a little bit. Now, so the challenge here, and with some different variations, is going to be, obviously we can go in first position, thinking about forward, down like this. Make sure you're not tracking to the middle. Make sure you're neutral and in, and same thing, neutral and in. You got the second, maybe a little more challenging as well. Same thing, don't let it track in, keeping it out from here, keeping it out, really focusing on its standing leg, focusing on your breathing as you lift that hip. Good. Another variation is going to be arms overhead. Now this is going to be a little more challenging depending on what your situation is, because if I'm here, I may tend to want to try and once again open my chest, and that's why it's important to think about stability here. And if you have some muscle tightness through here, we will eventually get to stretches and talk about our shoulders a little more. But arms overhead, and then maintaining this stability through the abdominals, mobility through the hips. Okay, very nice. Good. Now, more specific to our ballet contemporary, you can still go in a first position, right? And for our purposes here, I'm just going to stay up overhead. But when I lift up, I'm going to think about lifting neutral first, or in parallel on my standing leg, abdominals, and then I'm going to bring my leg out. Good. I have to really stay on that standing leg. Okay. And then bring it in and down. Other side from here as I lift up, staying on top of my hips. Good. Oh, I'm sorry. Neutral first. Yes. And then bringing out, abdominals, hips. Good. Bring it in and down. One of the things that we see a lot when people are asking, how can I get my leg higher? How can I get my leg higher? Oftentimes, it's actually not your leg that you're trying to get up. It's really everything else, right? Because if I am here, and theoretically speaking, if I can get my leg this high, good. What happens if I'm not stable here? Everything drops. What happens if I'm not stable here, right? I can't effectively lift my leg if I don't have a strong foundation to move from. So I know we're talking about hip flexors, but once again, you can't just talk about one part of the body. You need to connect everything else, right? So from here, if I'm trying to lift a leg, I'm maintaining my standing leg and my abdominals and my breathing. And then from here, being able to bring it out into a turned out position. And then we can do holds, right? Or the other thing too is when we have to kick and when we have to produce force, especially for things like dégagés, low or even grand battements, you're thinking about being able to lift up fast, and for our sake, for this exercise, we'll do slow down. Okay, so up fast, slow down. So if I'm here in this position, let's go arms overhead, I'm thinking about how can I bring my leg up. So I'm really bringing that up there. So going fast up, holding, slow down. Yes, other side, fast up, woohoo, a little harder, slow down. Let's try that one more time. Left side. So I really have to think about my left side. Hips, abdominals activated, and then up and down. Same thing on the left side one more time. Up and down. Yeah. So once again, if I'm up this way, I'm not trying to do this, or in trying to lift my hip, do that. All right. So once again, everything is connected. Absolutely. Okay. The next one, or last one that we did on Saturday, was thinking about controlling the hip above 90. Okay. And we can do this in two ways. The first one is we will go in more of a neutral position first, starting this way. And you can either use a small block or a coffee cup if you'd like more of a challenge to not knock it over, to really work on this control above 90. Okay. I believe on Saturday I placed it like this, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to humble myself. Place it that way. Okay. So for our purposes here, what I'm going to have you think about, once again, is going to be about your abdominals one more time, right? So when I lift up this way and come back down, I'm not going to let my back sink in order to get my leg high, right? In that case, I'm not activating through here at all, compensating through my hip, and am I really working on my strength here? Not so much, right? So for the purpose of this exercise, we will start in more of a neutral, and then you can have your arms either in second or overhead. Once again, overhead will be a little more challenging just because, right, you're trying to avoid that rib flare. But as I lift up, I want to make sure nothing here is moving, and down. Everything is in my hip. Okay, and let's try that one more time. Up and down. Good. There are different ways that we can do this. So for example, we don't just have our leg to the front. Since the way I'm demonstrating this is to the front, I'm actually going to shift my pelvis so my leg can be in different angles. Now, if you're at home, you can obviously place more things going all the way out, so you can really work on bringing your leg out and then out and then out as far as you can without discomfort and with good control. For our purposes here today, I will bring this leg in so I can think about sitting tall. And if I place this here, now instead of being neutral this way, my hips are kind of pointed out to the side a little more. So from here, thinking about lifting the leg, bringing it over and down. Good. So from here, lifting the leg, bring it over and down. And I can already feel that this is even a little taller for me. So there's no, it's not bad if you feel like, oh, I have to go lower. This is what we're working towards. So you want to work on that strength in your abdominals to hold yourself up, but then also to be able to lift the leg, right? We did this in neutral. I'll switch to my other side. So we did this in neutral where you're thinking about standing up, sitting up tall, being able to move the leg in different positions and down. This is in parallel. And you can also do these in turnout, right? So if I'm here, I'm going to think about lifting up, turning out, coming out, and down. Good. So you can see I was sinking back a little bit, right? So for the demonstration, I will not use this, but one more time, I'm thinking about control and quality. So I'm here, thinking with my arms out, up, rotating out, and in. Good. And then bring it back in. From here, whoo, pulling up in your abdominals, you're breathing. Good. Bring it back in and down. So it's a very simple exercise, but you want to practice it in different ranges, right? So that means you can go to the front doing this, yes, and then gradually progressing it as you go further out, right? So you can see in my case here, I have more difficulty trying to lift up through here. I can still do it, but I want to make sure that I'm holding in my abdominals, and that I can also think about when I do this exercise, being able to control in parallel for sure, but also being able to control in turnout and being able to rotate through here. Yes, good. Okay, so those are some hip flexor exercises that I like to use, and the most important part for me is that you begin to incorporate your understanding of your hip stability and your abdominal stability in relationship to your hip exercises, right? So ultimately at the end of the day, if I'm doing all of these exercises here and I'm just trying to force through it, but I'm doing a lot of like upper body motion, or I'm doing a lot of like compensations this way, or I'm holding tension in my neck like this, then what are we really doing, right? So make sure that whenever you're doing these exercises, or when someone's explaining exercises to you, that they break it down in a way that makes sense for you, and that when we do exercises, we're not creating, more patterns that would be like detrimental, right? So quality over quantity always. And then, yeah, hopefully this video helps you out with a little bit of some of these common exercises and kind of gets you thinking about everything in relationship to the whole body rather than just singular parts. All right, cool. And that is it for this one. If you have any questions, leave a comment below and I will try and get back to you. All right, take it easy.